applies it. Maybe if you do, if you can either speak up or say yes through the chat, please. A sense of whether this will be completely new for most people or something you're semi-familiar with or familiar with. I don't see anything coming through the chat. No one does. I mean, okay, there's someone. Evangelina is saying, my sister-in-law was a teacher in Chile, teaching in kindergarten, and she told you about the method. Okay, so you have information, but you haven't worked with it. Okay, thanks for sharing, Christina. Gaston, how are we doing with technology? I haven't seen anyone new join in the last couple of minutes. Do you know if some people are trying to join?
Two more are sending message, but if you want to start so we are in schedule.
Okay, great. Okay, so we'll start with introductions because I think it's we have to find the right balance between allowing those who are having technology issues, but also respect the times of those who joined us on time. So thank you very much for joining. I am Mariana Delaudo. I know some of you, I recognize some of your names, but if you don't know me, I've been associated with Winton for many years. I used to be in charge of the program for the international exams. And I'm Argentinian, now living in Canada. I've been in Canada for almost 20 years. So we have Dave with us as well, who has the opposite experience. He's a Canadian living in Argentina. So Dave, I'll let you introduce yourself, if you can, please.
Yeah, hi, my name's Dave, and Dave Ardern. I've been associated with Winton for a couple of years, and yes, I am a Canadian living in Argentina. And I guess I should remember to speak slowly because, just in case. Can you guys understand me when I am speaking, or is everything okay?
Yeah, and that's a good reminder for me too, because I always rush in both languages. So great. Crystal clear, they're saying.
Yeah, I'm really slow in Castellano, but I'll be speaking English this time. So, and
Great.
yes, I'm going to be giving an introduction to the Montessori method. And you'll see a little bit. It's not going to be a very deep dive, but it will introduce you to some of it, and you can try to perhaps process it into an English language course. So
great. Yeah, so the structure for today is that Dave will share the key theory around the methodology. I'll share some of my personal experiences. My 3 children are currently in the Montessori, working with the Montessori methodology. So I'll share some of my experiences as a mom, I guess, watching this method for some years now. And also we'll try to tie it to our exams and what we do at Winton, right? So some tips on what we think you may be able to apply as you teach English as a second language to your students, okay? Like I said before, we want this to be interactive if possible. It's more fun for you and more fun for us. So at any time, if your mic works, please feel free to interrupt, or like you've been doing. I see some of you writing on the chat, okay? Gaston, if we can go to the next slide. And of course, we have Gaston here as well, who all of you know, right? I know we didn't introduce you, Gaston, but he's helping us.
Okay, no problem.
Yeah, everyone knows you. And he's helping us with the technology piece so far too. So Dave, I'll pass it over to you, please.
Sure.
Okay.
Alrighty, so yeah, this is the cover page of these presentations. So basically, I am going to be giving a quick introduction about the life of Maria Montessori. About 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago, when she graduated from medical school, she started working in the field of psychiatry with children that were mentally disabled. And while she was doing it, she made some odd observations about things. But then what happened was her career took a turn, and she was given the assignment of working with children in a very, we'll say, a disadvantaged part of Rome, like a very poor part of Rome. And basically the children were basically, how do I say it? Nobody had any real hope for them. And she was just told to go in there and do what she could with them. And the things that she had learned while she was working with the disabled children, she started to put into practice in the school that she opened in 1907, and that was called the Casa dei Bambini. And while she was working with these children, she made a number of observations about how they operated. And she
Dave, sorry, if you can speak near the microphone.
Okay, sure, yeah. All right, I'm gonna get closer to my computer.
Yes, closer, sorry.
So yeah, from when she opened the Casa dei Bambini in 1907 through to about 1910, the success of the school compared to the expectations of the school when it first opened, it proved to be a very successful way of doing it. And news spread throughout Italy and then eventually worldwide. So the name Maria Montessori became a household household name in the world of education. So now it's a very popular system of schools. So yeah, go on to the next slide, Gaston, I guess probably. Go ahead, next one, next slide. Okay, so a quote from Maria Montessori: "Our care of the child should be governed not by the desire to make him learn things, but by the endeavor always to keep burning within him that light which is called intelligence." Now, one of the big observations that Maria Montessori made was that children have a natural desire to learn. When they're basically left to their own devices, they will learn. They will look for the things that will help them learn. They don't necessarily need instruction the way that our system, the typical education system, stand up and lecture. Just kids left to their own devices want to learn. And that was probably the most fundamental observation that Maria Montessori made. So her method is to provide an environment to the children that supports that natural desire to learn. So yeah, go ahead, next slide. So in the top picture, we have a typical classroom. And in the bottom picture, we have a Montessori classroom. And here is where I want to open it up to anybody who has a microphone or can type quickly, just to say, what differences can you see between the two systems? And if anybody can think of any advantages of the Montessori system versus the typical classroom. If anybody wants to do it, turn the mic on and go ahead.
Para el que quiera abrir el micrófono, tiene la opción o puede escribir en el chat y le puedo habilitar el micrófono para que hable.
Yeah,
Dave,
definitely.
Can you see the chat? Evangelina's writing.
Yeah, the Montessori system is not so structured. It's definitely the case that the desks, well, to the extent that there are desks, there are areas, and each area has its own thing. And so certainly it's not an eyes up front, everybody listen to the teacher environment. You can see the shelves, all the shelves are loaded with things. Yep, lots of objects. That is absolutely correct. The objects are basically there to inspire the children to learn. It's just pick things up and work with them and figure out a variety of different life skills simply by handling objects, by, I don't want to say playing with them, but using them in the way that they were designed. It's very, very different. Is that like, should we go to the filled classroom slide? Yeah, go ahead to the next slide. It's more pictures, and so. Okay, so now continue with the discussion. Certainly, what are the differences that you can see in these pictures? Can anybody even see the teacher in the second picture of the Montessori classroom? All right, yeah, Gaston, if you can. Oh, okay.
Sorry. They are writing.
Yeah.
They're not teacher-centered, yeah.
Yeah, that is correct. Yeah, basically the children are free to learn on their own. They're not working on the same thing at the same time. Each little area represents kind of a different subject in the Montessori method or in the school. So you have like a sciences area and you have a languages area, and the kids are all just basically working in their own thing. Whatever interests them, they go to. There is a teacher. The teacher is kind of there as a guide. Usually, in addition to the teacher, there's going to be a couple assistants depending on the class size. The ratio is probably, there's going to be 8 students per adult in the room, whether it's teacher or the assistants. So yeah, that's good. Should we go to the next one? Or? So here is the role of the teacher in the difference between the teacher in the Montessori system versus the teacher in your typical classroom. The teacher doesn't set the curriculum or prepare lesson plans. The kids are basically on their own to learn whatever is in front of them, whatever interests them. The teacher doesn't set the pace of learning. That's really up to the kids themselves. Teacher doesn't drive the process. The teacher doesn't lead, and the teacher doesn't reward or punish. The teacher does have to prepare some things, like has to make sure that these shelves are stocked and that the things are there for, oh, well, wait, no, that's good. Actually, yeah, go ahead to the next slide if you want.
Sorry, you need the next one?
Sure. Now, another feature of the Montessori classroom is that the students are not necessarily of the same age. Something that Maria Montessori discovered when she was doing her research is that kids generally go through phases. So you have children between 0 and 3 years old. Some children learn to speak when they're 1.5. Some children it takes to 3 years old. So basically each age group is reflective of general learning themes that are happening at a given time. So infancy covers 3 years. Primary covers from 3 to 6 years. So basically there's 3-year blocks where you are developing certain skills. Some students are developing faster than others. Oh, hang on. I seem to have lost the slides.
Yeah, I think we lost that one. Oh.
Hang on, let me just.
Yeah, I got lost the connection. I can try to load them. Let me see. He was saying there's a bad storm where he is, and that he had some people saying that they were not able to get to the internet.
Oh, really? Okay.
And that's why they were not able to join. I do have the slides. Let me see
Okay.
if I can join them. Sorry, everyone. Sia was saying the technology was working well. I shouldn't have said anything. Hold on, I'm trying to figure out where I get their share. 1 second, please. I'm trying to see. Okay, here we go. I'm gonna get the PowerPoint open. So I'm just loading the PowerPoint so I can share it on my screen, okay? So the PowerPoint is taking a minute to load.
Hello,
Okay.
can you hear me?
Oh, okay. Yeah, Keston's back.
Can you see the...
Okay,
Yeah,
you were,
yeah,
fast,
I
you were
can-
faster than me.
Okay.
I almost had it. Okay, great.
Okay. All right. Okay, so an important feature of having multiple years in a classroom is that the older students, or the ones that have progressed further, can help the younger students in the learning process. And so that's really useful for the child that's learning, but it's also useful for the child that's teaching, because one of the most important things to, or one of the best ways to make sure that the concept is cemented is to basically teach it yourself. So to the extent that you can incorporate that into an English language classroom, certainly that's a huge feature. If you can get the the students that are further along in the learning process to help out those that are, maybe the weaker students. I don't want to say weaker students, but the ones that are still learning. So certainly, to the extent, rather than just have the teacher do all the teaching, if you can get the more advanced students helping out the less advanced students, that's a great feature to be able to do. And the classes are larger than the typical classroom, but again, the teacher is not having to deal on a one-on-one basis to the children. There's the teacher plus a couple assistants to help out. So the ratio is usually 8 students to an adult. So okay, next slide, Chair, I guess.
Dave, before we move on, there's a question from Angelina on the chat. And she asked this right before you put up the slide, though, but she said, does this work with very numerous classrooms, 36, 37 students? Yeah, and I know that your slide shows that it works on larger class sizes. Yeah, I think, well, they can maintain the order, right? And every kid is not wondering to do their own thing.
Yeah, well, assuming that you have the space for the classes, certainly. You have the different areas, and you have all sorts of activities for the children to participate in. And yeah, a class of 36, 37 students, you're probably going to have, how many? Divide by 8, 10, yeah, probably between, well, a teacher plus 3 or 4 assistants. So yeah, certainly it would work, and in fact they prefer larger classrooms just because there's so many opportunities for kids to learn from each other. Yep. Mm-hmm. How's your experience with that, Mariana?
Yeah, no, I know I was reflecting on class size too, because I did wonder, so if you have so many kids, especially in certain ages when they're very active, how do you manage having everyone doing different things in a large class size? I know where I live, though, there's a regulation that you need, I think in the elementary level, is 16 students to a teacher. But I've seen some schools where it's a larger ratio, and they make it work. It's amazing. It's amazing. I could not believe it when I saw it, like all the kids just working in their own areas. The classroom is not loud. Somehow they each focus, and the teacher manages to get everyone doing what they need to do, even with a large class size. Because I know that's often a challenge in Argentina, right? With especially some of the public schools with very large class sizes. But it seems to work. Yeah, and
a lot of the focus of the Montessori system is personal responsibility. The children are free to take things off the shelves and use them and learn from them, but a huge responsibility is to put things back on the shelves when they're finished. Like, they have to keep the place clean themselves. I mean, if you think about it, yeah, the temptation is there to think that every class is just going to be a disaster zone at the end of the day. But really, the system is there, and it has been. That is something that Maria Montessori noticed in 1907, was that the system teaches personal responsibility really well. So the kids it's not chaos in the classroom like you would think. It's assuming that the system's been going all these years. It does work reasonably well, yeah.
Yeah.
So, okay, anyway, yeah, sure. Is that next slide, or?
Yeah, I think we're good for the next slide.
Okay. So this is, oh, hang on, I'm just moving things around here. So yeah, never help a child with a task at which he feels he can succeed. Basically, don't spoon feed the child. The child will figure it out by themselves. So yeah, the Montessori teacher needs to know how much help to give, when to give it, and when not to give help. So yeah, the typical Montessori classroom is child-centered. The children are free to work at their own pace. They're free to explore and discover on their own. They can talk freely as long as they don't disturb others. And yeah, they provide their own stimulation and motivation to learn. It's not provided from somewhere else. It comes from within. So yeah, they have free range to walk around the classroom, interact with the materials. And yeah, as I was saying before, they develop a sense of responsibility. And that comes from a very important thing is, the teacher and the assistants have to make sure that the kids know to put the materials back in the proper place. And yeah, the teachers are the guides, and they're there to encourage the children to think and act for themselves. So I just read that slide. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, and how are we doing? Any questions?
Yeah, there's a question there, okay, David. It's one around, we're talking a lot about the kids, it's kindergarten, what happens in primary school, and this method is applied in primary school too. Now, Dave and I, before this session, we were talking about, we talked about high school. Dave, you asked, well, I haven't seen it in action at the high school level, but certainly it is applied through primary school.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it does. It certainly goes to junior high. I've heard of high schools where you have the Montessori system. I personally, in my own opinion, I would be a little bit worried about having a Montessori high school, because eventually students need to learn to deal with things like university, where it's definitely not Montessori. So yeah, and the Montessori system, you're seeing a lot of building blocks to play with and that sort of thing. But over time, yeah, it does continue, and the lessons are more sort of science-based, where I'm going to teach you a concept and you're going to go away to your areas to experiment with that concept and to learn it. So the idea of, you know, maybe provide a little bit of lecture, but not, you know, just eyes front staring at the teacher and the blackboard explaining it all. No, it still works, certainly into junior high. So
what age is junior high? What would that translate to in the Argentinian system?
That would probably end at like grade 8, whatever the Argentinian equivalent of grade 8 is.
Okay, so that'd be like a 13-year-old, so
yeah,
pre-high school.
12, 13.
And Tanya, if I can add, so my oldest child is in primary school. So like Dave said, they do have a period during the day where they do classwork together. So they learn, you know, science or topics that they all have to cover and every kid needs to know. And then they have, when they do language, math, the core areas within Montessori, they do it independently. So the teacher may do some lecture around, I don't know, multiplications, for example, my daughter's doing now. And some kids grasp the concepts faster than others. So they use the Montessori tools to do harder multiplications, some of them, while some of the kids do basic, you know, step counting, like related to multiplication. So they do have some time when they teach something together, but they still apply and go at their own speed and in terms of what they practice and what they do in the primary level. That's what I've seen.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So should we go to the next slide or okay?
Okay, yeah.
Anyway, here's just a description of your typical Montessori classroom, the various areas, the things that they would be learning in these areas. So yeah, you've got a cultural area where you're learning things about geography, math, language arts, you know, that can include, you know, reading, writing, practical life area, sensorial area, reading, arts and crafts. There's all, I mean, when you look at the pictures of the Montessori classroom, you can see kind of little areas of shelves to look at. And so these are generally the kinds of things that you will find in each area. So yeah, this is the typical Montessori classroom, as opposed to an English language classroom. Obviously, that's an entirely different thing. So okay, yeah, go ahead. Next slide, I guess. Yeah. So basically, Winton is not expecting anybody to fundamentally rearrange their classrooms or anything. But the idea is, if you can, if the space is there, maybe think about providing some sort of reading area where people can go off on their own and find a quiet place, maybe talk with other students, not have to worry about the teacher, just basically have an area available to the students where they can learn independently. So if that is feasible, I mean, obviously space is an issue that everybody has, and is that possible? I don't know, but if it is, think about it, certainly. So, and finally, here is the typical Montessori shelf from a cultural area. There's globe, there's magnifying glass, various other things. And here is a blank shelf for you guys to think about. If you had the space available, what sort of things would you want to put on those shelves to encourage independent learning and develop kind of a sense of independence and interest in learning So think about it. I don't know what you guys would imagine being on those shelves, if any ideas. Books, obviously, but not just books, other things. Can anybody think of anything? Or? Flashcards?
Shapes, if you're teaching the little ones, or things with different colors. Older people, there could be flashcards related to grammar topics. Any comments or input on the chat? Balls, little toys, yeah. Flashcards, paintings, numbers, tablets, colors. Oh, good. Lots of thoughts coming there.
Yeah, this is just, to develop ideas. It's just some.
You know what, Dave? Sorry, I like the examples people are putting, because I know one challenge I've heard from teachers in Argentina before is, the budget and the cost of items. And what surprises me when I walk into the Montessori classrooms, yes, there's a lot of things, but I find they're not, like, there's a lot of simple things that are not very costly that are there. Like, for practical life, I know it's not language related, but they have little sponges, so they learn how to clean the table. Or for language, they may have, photocopies of letters. So it's not something that, I don't think it's something that you need a huge budget to purchase very fancy or hard to find items. It's the simple things. And I think that speaks, well, some people said tablets and microphones. Those are more expensive. But sheets of paper of different sizes, there's things you can do without spending a lot of money.
Yeah.
If you want to do tablets, obviously that's more costly.
Yeah, I mean, there's an entire industry devoted to providing materials for Montessori schools in North America. It's pretty big area for, like, you can find all sorts of stuff online, but obviously it's not as big down in Argentina as it is up there. So I think you might need to kind of use your creativity and think about things that you could bring in from home and turn the reading area into something interesting for the students.
Okay.
So I guess that's it for the presentation. Is it? Yeah. Here are, obviously it might be tricky to write these down frantically to get the.
I'm pasting it in the chat, so if someone wants, they can copy from the chat the same resources that they can see on the computer or telephone.
It's really weird. Montessori seems to, like, there are Montessori societies and there are organizations, like, to be it, how do I say it? What am I trying to say? There are Montessori licensing centers where you can become a Montessori teacher, but it's not so much an idea, like you can use the Montessori method without actually having to pay anybody or to get certified in the system. It's just, you can freely just kind of say that you use the Montessori ideas, and, like, don't say that we're a Montessori school, but certainly you can incorporate these ideas without having to be licensed to do so or anything. So
yeah, that's interesting, Dave, because here I find, here in Canada, I live outside Toronto, right? And in this area, there's a lot of schools that call themselves Montessori schools, but when I actually checked, I think only about 20% of them are actually accredited.
Yeah.
But the others can use the name and use it in their name and apply the methodology. So at least here, there's no one checking that, it's not like people cannot use the name because they're not accredited.
Yeah, there's a lawsuit in the 50s between the American Montessori Association and the American Montessori Society, and I think the judge just basically decided that Montessori was it was not a name brand. You couldn't trademark it or anything like that. If you want to call yourself Montessori, it's a descriptive word as opposed to an actual trademark. So
people can use it, and they do. It works for them. Good. Gaston, I'm not sure what's the next slide. I do have a few comments. Yeah, before that, I wanted to share. Really thinking. We tried to touch on the English language teaching that you guys do as teachers, right? Like the audience in this webinar today. And I know we talked about, for me, a big thing is, for example, I know we're very used to, giving every kid the same book and everyone goes home and reads, we pick a book for the whole class. Sometimes, and I know you don't always have class time because the classes are not very long if you teach at a school or if you have your own institute where you teach on your own, but maybe giving the kids 3-4 options of books that you have anyway and letting them see what they're drawn to. That sometimes helps because that's part of this, like following the kids' interest and motivation, and almost because they make the choice, then they're more likely to follow it. So that's a simple principle that I find apply. I saw it apply with my children. I think when I see at the theory of Montessori that it could be applied in the English classrooms. Obviously, you need structure. You have your lesson plans. That's what we're traditionally used to, but where you can also maybe make a difference. And I think this is. I've also heard from teachers in Argentina that it's a challenge. It's always a challenge where you teach people with different abilities, right? In almost every classroom, you have people who can either learn faster or they dedicate more time with homework, and others maybe don't. I think the Montessori philosophy is good for that because that's where maybe you can give different people different homework. So if one kid just does the minimum 2 pages, let's say, of grammar practice, and another one is interested and does 3 or 4, you can help them, they can practice more. I know it's hard because you don't want someone to get very much ahead of everyone else, but then you cannot follow the same lesson plan. But there may be ways to motivate the learning for some of them by giving them more homework, for example, or different homework. And it may not be that much work for you. You may already have, I don't know, if you're teaching a grammar topic, you may already have different exercises and you can differentiate the students there. That may work. I know one thing I've used when I've examined students for the Winton exams is if we have flashcards or a picture that we ask them questions, instead of indicating, especially with the younger ones, I've done this, instead of telling them what book, here's which one I will ask them, I put a few pictures in front of them, maybe 3 different laminations or pictures, and say, which one do you like? And then based on the one they like, I would ask them. It's a way to make them feel comfortable and almost like they pick what they're drawn to. And then the outcome is the same because I asked them the same questions, but it's part of making them feel more comfortable and drawn to what they're interested in. I want to address, because some people say, well, Montessori sounds good. What are disadvantages of this method? Obviously, not everyone applies it. I can tell you what I've observed. I know people who had children in this methodology, and if their children require more structure, more direction, it may not be for them, and they may be better in a traditional school environment rather than let them wander around and go towards their what they may be more interested in. So that's where, what I've seen here too, where we can choose the different schooling and where kids may go. It may not be for everyone from that perspective. Kids who need structure, they don't do great in this environment. And the second thing that I've noticed, especially with one of my daughters, is because they rely so much on the tools. So, when Dave showed the image with all the stations, for example, for math, they use like a small abacus, so they do a lot of their multiplications with the tools. So when she tries to do it in her head, she cannot. And I find if she didn't have the tools that are very Montessori focused, she would probably have to think more in her head, and she could do them faster. So she can do it, but I was talking with the principal about this, and she said, yeah, that's a way in Montessori. There's tools to help them. They eventually can do it, faster on their own. But that's something I've seen. I think in the traditional method, it's different. But I see a slight disadvantage. The relying on all those materials they have in the classroom. And I wanted to make a comment about what Dave said about the older children in the class. That was something I was very nervous about. So having a 3-year-old in a classroom with a 6-year-old, there's a big difference. 3-year-olds cannot read, write. A 6-year-old can usually, right? But I found the motivation that the kids get, at least I've seen my children want to read because other older kids are reading and they're taking things home, so books home. So I think it is a great motivation, and I think that's what Maria Montessori found here. And I know I was hesitant about that, but I've seen it work, which is interesting. It was interesting for me. Okay. So, Diana's asking a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, you're going to address it.
Oh, can I? Okay. Can I address it? Okay. So what happens with a child who struggles with bad behavior? Yeah, well, as Mariana was saying, that sometimes the Montessori system isn't suitable for everybody. And now they are trying to instill a sense of responsibility in the kids before they get to the bad behavior. Certainly the teacher does have a role. It's not so much to punish, but it's to keep the classroom under control. Can it spiral out of control? Like, Mariana, do you know of any students where things have gotten really ugly?
You know what, I've seen it once in a classroom where the kids were loud and they turned the lights off in the classroom. So the students know that was like, what happened? Just for a second, right? And they all became quiet. And yeah, so I think it can happen. I think you're always going to see that at any age. The students can temporarily get either misbehave, or you can have 1 or 2 kids who cause trouble. And I have seen that. And a technique I've seen the teachers use is really try to separate them. So if some kids gravitate to each other and they cause trouble together and they always go to the same station together, they try to, even though the methodology says to let them go towards what they like, is try to influence them to go to different places or stay away from certain kids if together they cause trouble. So I've seen that. Yeah, I think that's always going to happen.
Human nature. Does anybody have any observations about the Montessori? Like, do they think this might work? This would never work?
Well, people type, the biggest advantage I see and why I chose this is because the one key principle is to let each person maximize their own potential. So kids who can learn faster do it, others who need more help take more time. I like that idea of trying to just let everyone, no one's ever, not 2 kids in the classroom are never exactly the same, right? Yeah, but Laura is saying, I don't think it will work in public schools. It's a very big change in mindset and planning and structure and setup.
Well, yeah, I've heard all sorts of things about Argentina public schools, but I don't know.
Marlene is saying you can use some ideas in our classrooms, and that's really the goal that we had today, was just share with you just highlights like Dave did on what this methodology is, and see some bits and pieces that you may be able to consider in your work. Especially, we know most of you have your own institutes, teach at home, or work in private schools where you may be able to apply some of this. Not everything completely, but the idea of different books or flashcards, the things we talked about. Take what you may be able to benefit from. Okay. How are we doing with time, Dave? We're almost at 10:02. I know it's almost 11 p.m. in Argentina.
Yeah.
So let's see, Gathon, can you go to the next slide, please? Okay. Yeah, I think we were at the end of it, so we're doing good with time. I think you guys know about the Winton portal, where you can go to download resources and information. Gathon, will the slides be available there, or will you distribute them to those who attended?
The slides can be given to the teachers that can send an email, and I can send back the slides.
Okay. So if you're interested in the slides, you can email Gathon and he will send them to you. Laura has a question. How long are your classes there? Well, when it's a Montessori school, it's the whole day. I don't know if that's what you're asking, Laura. So then they have periods throughout the day for different, they call them work periods. So for example, you may start in the morning and from 9 to 10:30, it's a Montessori work period. So that's where kids do that. And then they have recess and snack. Then they may have another 1 hour work period and then lunch. Most schools here go from about 9, the full day, from 9 to 3:30 p.m. And they usually have one large Montessori work period in the morning and one in the afternoon. I hope that answers your question. Okay. Good. Okay, I'll do a final check for questions. Or any other comments?
Oh, we got 2 more people joined. Okay.
Well, I hope they didn't get the time wrong, or maybe the internet, the storm is just clearing. Okay, Christina has a comment there that in the 50s there were 2 teachers, they were sisters who applied this method and it worked. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start early. Like, you have to start the kids in the Montessori system, and yeah, no, I mean, I can't imagine just starting a Montessori classroom in a public school now when the kids are 10 years old and assuming it'll work. It might get messy. So
yeah. And Diana said her aunt is a teacher in the US, and she teaches Spanish with through these instruments. Great. Well, thanks for sharing. I think we're going to end there. I hope you found this to be interesting and useful. Thank you, Dave, for your time and sharing this with us. And all the contact information is here if you guys need anything, like as we said before, the slides or any other information. But thank you for taking time out of your Thursday evening to hear us today. And I don't know, Dave, if you have anything else before we end.
Oh no, I can't. Yeah, no, just thank you guys. That was interesting, and certainly.
Great. Okay. Thanks to everyone. Have a good night.
Okay. Good night,
Bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.